Hi, welcome back. Sometimes a test case may fail, but then pass once it's ran again. In this video, I will demo how I program Selenium to automatically rerun all test cases that fail in a test run. There are a number of ways that this can be done, and I will show you two ways. One way is to rerun a test case immediately after the test case fails, and the other way is to rerun all failed test cases only after all test cases in the run finish executing. After I demo both types of reruns, I will provide a few reasons why a test case might fail and then later pass, and give my reasons for preferring to run the test one way over the other. Just a reminder again, the videos in this series are not for the purpose of training, but only to show you my coding style. Let me show you my code for rerunning a test case immediately after it fails. TestNG allows this to be done by using the IRetryANalyzer Interface. I created this IRetryANalyzer class that implements the interface. I set how many times to retry running the test case using this max retry count variable. Setting it to 0 indicates that the failed test cases will not rerun after it fails. For the demo, I have this set to 1, so that right after a test case fails, it retries running one more time. Here are the 4 test cases that would be executed in the run. I named them so that it is easy to see which ones will fail. The reason why 2 out of the 4 will fail is because I have it coded to execute on a web element that does not exist in the web page that I automated. The interface implementation needs to be binded to each test annotation as shown here. When I execute the run, pay attention to the results window in Eclipse to see the order that the test cases will run. Also note the values typed into the application under test to identify which test case is running and if it is expected to fail or not. Let's start the test run. We can see in the name text field that this is test case number 3 and that it will fail. And it did fail, as we can also see here in the Eclipse results window. So it will immediately rerun the same test case again. And here it is running test case 3 again. And test case number 3 failed again. Now it is running the next test case. And from the test case name, we know it will fail and repeat just like test case number 3 did. It failed. Now it's repeating. It failed. Now test case number 1 is executing. It will pass, so it will not repeat. Now test case number 2 is executing. It will pass, so it will not repeat. The test run finished. Here are the detailed test results. These test steps have been executed in many of my previous videos, and in this video I want to concentrate on demonstrating how test cases that failed are re-executed. Pause here if you would like to look at the results some more. Now here are 4 similar test cases that I will execute, but this time all of the failed test cases will only rerun after all the test cases execute once. TestNG has a way to run a test case, test class, and a test suite by executing an XML file. Here's the XML I will execute. As you can see here that it is set to run the test suite TQA pass-fail class a total of 2 times. Once for all test cases, and once again for just the failed test cases. This is the same class that contains the 4 test cases we just looked at. To have it run up to 3 times in total, all I have to do is add another node here with the same test class. Let me show you how the code in my base test class ensures that only the failed test cases execute after the first iteration. In my before annotation method, which is executed before each test case is executed, I wrote this method that checks the database to see if the test case is to run or not. One criteria in order to run the test cases is that it cannot have a pass test result. So if a test case already did pass in the run, it will not execute for each remaining retry. The test enabled flag is set to false if it already passed, and true if it did not already pass. This variable is then used at the start in each test case as shown here. So if the test already passed, execution flow is returned out of the test case so that none of the remaining code in the test case is executed. Ideally, I would want to modify the enabled constant in the @test annotation. After the test run demo, I will go over some alternative code ideas for running a suite of test cases after failure, and some of the challenges in doing so. Now let's kick off the test run. Just like the last run, pay attention to the results window in the Eclipse here, as well as for the text that gets typed into the first name field in the AUT to see what test is executing and if it should fail or not. The test started. This is test case number 3 running. Now you can see in the results window that it failed. Test case number 4 started. You can see in the results window that it failed. Test case number 1 started. You can see in the results window that it passed. And now the last test case, number 2, started. It passed. In the results window, you can now see all the test cases 1 through 4 have executed. Now the first failed test case is re-executing. Now in the results window, you can see the results for the first retry test case. It failed. Now the second failed test case is executing. Now you can see in the results window that it failed. The test run finished. Now you might be wondering why the result set shows that the 2 test cases that passed also seem to have executed a second time. But look at the execution duration. At most, it is only in milliseconds, only enough time to execute the test-enabled if clause in the test cases. Besides, I do not use this window for reporting, I use my custom reports. You can see that the last test case executed was the failed test number 4. In the report, the last step executed was also for test case number 4. The database also shows the correct status of each test case for the run ID, number 1740. And only one HTML report was created for each test case that passed, as well as the 2 for each test case that failed. From my professional experience, the second way of running test cases is preferred, where the failed test cases run again only after all test cases are executed. Let me give you some examples why. During a test run, a feature being tested that relies on one of the many servers or tables in a database might have a temporary issue. Maybe there was a power outage, a developer or database admin made an accidental change, or some features in the AUT behaved very slow the first time a user uses them after a rebuild refresh, and it just needs to be woken up. It might take some time for the application under test to be ready for the test cases to test it again, so rerunning a test right after it failed might not be enough time. Instead, the next test case in queue can be run because it may not be dependent upon the same issues needing to be resolved. And even if it is, running all the remaining test cases that never had executed yet will give a lot more time for the issues to get resolved before rerunning all the failed test cases. I wasn't planning to include this next part in my video, but while preparing for this video, the AUT in this demo actually failed unexpectedly. Test case number 2, which was coded to pass, reran a second time after getting a 502 bad gateway error, and the automation script captured a screenshot. My test reported it as a failure at the start of the test. The rerun passed. The 2 HTML reports generated show the failed and passed runs too, and the database run table and test cases results table show the correct final results too. So yeah, I thought this was pretty cool that this failure happened just as I was thinking of examples to include in my video. And I was geeking out a bit that my test run captured it, so pretty cool. Now the last thing I want to mention is some ideas for improving my code. As mentioned before, I want to be able to modify the enabled value at the test annotation so that only the failed test cases will rerun. The enabled variable modification can be done by implementing the annotation transformer interface, which is part of the testng framework. Here is the implementation. I use a method to check the database to see if the test case passed or not. This is the same method called to do the same in the before method annotation. It returns yes if the test is to run. If it is not to run, the enabled variable is set to false. But enabled is a constant variable, so it can only be set once for all test cases at the same time, which is only at the start of the run before any test cases start to execute. Problem is that I want to set enabled after the first iteration of the run, where only then can it be determined which test cases are to be enabled or not for the retry. To use the interface in the run, the class that implements it needs to be coded in the XML as a listener, as shown here. And it doesn't matter if I place it just before the first test iteration or the second test iteration, because it still executes at the very start of the run. One of the ideas I have to handle the annotation issue is to modify my QA WebPortal. When I kick off runs from the QA WebPortal, my PHP code starts Selenium execution from the command line. But my ultimate solution would be to loop through all the test cases in my database and for each iteration, execute this line of code. Except I will replace the hard-coded test case name with a variable containing the test case name. This line of code does work, but there is at least a 45-second delay between each iteration. The delay has something to do with the command line execution. So instead, I have the code point to a pom.xml file configured to run XMLs containing the test classes to run. I'm thinking to update the PHP code to first run an XML file that does not use the annotation transformer listener. And then after it finishes running, have it run a similar XML file that does contain the listener, but have it point to the run ID in the first XML run, so both XML runs are rerunning and reporting for the same run ID. Another option with additional coding would be to have the rerun execute the testng-failed.xml. This XML gets automatically generated after a run, which is configured to execute only failed test cases. From a user point of view, the QA WebPortal will also be updated. The web page would be updated so anyone can choose which test case class to execute, how many times to retry rerunning test cases, and choose many more configuration options. Based on the tester selection, my code will generate XML files on the fly so that they will not need to be hard-coded. But hopefully, I will find a way to decrease the delay time between each individual test case command line execution so that I run database queries and store procedures instead of using XML files. In one of the earlier videos I uploaded, I demonstrated how the QA WebPortal is used to run Selenium test cases. In a future video, once all the code is modified, I will demo it again with the rerun updates. If you have any questions about retrying failed test cases that I covered in this video, please send them to me in an email. My email address, as well as the link to the next video to watch, is located in the description below this video. Thank you for watching.